Hey guys, Pearson Castillo is Southwest Missouri. Uh, Pearson Castillo weather coverage music and more. Um, so I wanted to I wanted to make this stream and people can weigh in the comments. Um, I wanted to make this stream discussing a recent YouTube trend I've seen in the EAS community that I wanted to talk about. Then seeing people have a resurgence in, and that's using FM transmitters to broadcast and especially self-activate weather radio receivers. Um, so I just wanted to talk about that a little bit and talk about a little bit of the legality. So a lot of people have said under Part 15 that you can do this under Part 15 of the FCC, which legally allows you to use FM transmitters for small ranges of power to broadcast signals to, uh, for an example, car radios without audio input devices. Um, I personally have an FM transmitter that I use to broadcast to radio because I have stereos, of course, and I love broadcasting to all my receivers at once, which under Part 15 is legal. Um, but I want to talk about especially using it to broadcast to your NOAA weather radio, and that falls into more of a legal gray area because and just a um is it safe gray area because although FM transmitters, especially these ones that people have been using to broadcast on FM weather radio, don't broadcast a long range of signal to the weather radio around only about 2 or 3 feet from my conclusion that I've seen from people's videos. The signal and therefore the broadcasting of the weather radio alerts is still going to last quite a bit longer than the actual weather radio can pick that up. So what I'm saying is if you have an FM transmitter, your your radio receivers, if you tune them to that frequency on the FM dial, are gonna broadcast a lot longer. Um, we're talking. I've gotten mine, which is about 13 bucks at Walmart, and it's an older one. I've gotten mine to reach like with a good radio, on an empty frequency, mine will reach 200, 300, 400 feet. Depending on the angle, that transmitter will go all the way out to the highway that we live near. So it kind of falls under a legal gray area because, for one, broadcasting and use of the EAS system alarms is prohibited in commercial or project use, which honestly, in the EAS community, it's kind of a legal gray area. I suppose that people could technically sue the EAS community on um, because we're using, especially the community of making alerts for using valid tones. Now, whether this has ever happened or will ever happen, I have no idea, but it's a possibility. So, broadcasting the frequency or the signal, which broadcasts quite a bit longer range, it may not broadcast a very long range with weather radio frequency, but it will still broadcast that quite a bit of a ways on FM frequency. And, like, for an example, what if you're in an apartment block or something and somebody is scanning through radio frequencies and is hearing you play the EAS stuff over the radio? The vast majority of the public does not know what an FM transmitter does or that they are available. Um, a, a lot of the public does not know, so they could take that to be an actual radio broadcast, especially if you have like somebody who's like elderly or something like that that doesn't really know. You know, they could mistake that for a real broadcast of an emergency situation. Um, so broadcasting using these things is legal, but broadcasting weather radio is a little bit more dubious because, to my understanding, the FCC is not too keen on people using the EAS for any broadcast. As a matter of fact, there have been many lawsuits over the years of the EAS being played on the radio and on shows and on TV. The FCC has sued big time for people doing that. And so, the likelihood that you will get caught is not very high, but it's still there, especially if you're in a populated area where, like, for an example, if you do this in, like, a city where you're, like, in the middle of the city, somebody can go outside their house, or something, or be in their garage or whatever, listening to a radio, neighbors, and they could probably pick up that signal pretty faintly because I can tell you, I can get it all the way around my house. My FM, I don't even know how far these new ones broadcast, but this is an old one. This one doesn't even make the weather radios do that. I think the ones that are doing that are digital, so they're a lot more. I think they're a little more powerful with their signal than your one that I have, because mine, I can tell you, broadcast for a good 200, 300 feet. I can get it all the way. Like, if I put it in my window, I can get that thing really far out. Um, with my antenna down, no less. On a frequency, on tropospheric days when signals are able to jump a little bit farther in the atmosphere, especially if you consider it this way, the higher you up are, the more that signal is liable to jump. That signal can get out a lot farther than it would necessarily in normal conditions. I don't know how far, but I can tell you it'd probably get out pretty far. And in a city, that's enough to, especially if you're broadcasting on a frequency that's typically a known used frequency for a radio station, which likelihood is the radio station is going to bleed over the frequency and block it out. But In the case that it doesn't, you're broadcasting that on somebody's preferred radio frequency, and they're able to pick that FM up into your whatever EAS you're broadcasting to your weather radios. The claim isn't that it broadcasts a long way on the weather radio frequencies. It, although it can, the claim for me is that it broadcasts a long way on FM for quite a distance, which with it broadcasting quite a distance away on FM, at least mine anyway, you could essentially make the public believe that it is a emergency situation. Now I wanted to talk about the weather radio portion. Again, it's illegal to use these transmitters, illegal to transmit the EAS alarm in any event except authorized uses, and that I assume will apply to all transmissions of said alarm. So any transmission that is not any transmission of the EAS over any sort of airwaves could result in fines. Many people know also, yes, transmitting with a baofeng, highly illegal. In most circumstances, that's highly illegal. It's not suggested you transmit anything using a baofeng except maybe over GMRS or FRS frequencies, although that in itself is another legal gray area, especially for FRS frequencies. The baofeng can transmit quite a while, so any transmission of an EAS alarm could get you in serious trouble, and any transmission of that near a facility that can pick up that signal on any frequency really could get you in trouble, because the bleed through with the baofeng is pretty strong. A baofeng's bleed through is very strong, which, by the way, if you're wondering, the bleed through that you're hearing, or the signal that you're hearing when it transmits to the weather radio is bleed through, from my understanding. It's powerful enough to bleed through to those other frequencies, which again, that's a moral gray area, that's a legal gray area. Now, would I suggest doing that? No, definitely not. The bleed through is definitely when it bleeds through on the weather radio frequency. Plus, I think now I may be mistaken here, but that can be dangerous to some equipment. Also, that can cause some issues to some equipment. So definitely be very careful area. I would highly discourage not using your FM transmitter to broadcast the EAS in any form. If you're gonna self-activate your radios, get encoders, equipment that is going to allow you to do so without transmitting an actual signal across any airwaves. Because again, that's a big gray area right there. So, highly wouldn't recommend it. The transmission of any EAS over any frequency, that is, I'm pretty sure, definitely illegal if you're caught. So, although the use of the FM transmitter is legal, the broadcast of the EAS is illegal through the FCC. I'd have to look up the act, or the, what what that falls under, but I think I read that in the EAS emergency plan of usage of the EAS system, um, which I can try and find that document for anyone that wants it. I will try and see if I can find a copy of that. I know there's PDFs of it online. Um, so yeah, using it to transmit, probably definitely a legal gray area, and I'm gonna lean highly toward don't do that, especially if you're in a populated area. If you're using the and especially if it's on a frequency that has any radio station within receiving distance, you know. So I would say up to if there's a radio station on the frequency that somebody can listen to up to 70 miles away on that frequency, then don't use it. A good tool for that is Radio Locator, which I believe shows you um, empty frequencies in the area to use with those transmitters. So that's a Radio Locator. Look that website up. It's also got a lot of useful tools for streaming radio stations and for searching nearby radio, AM and FM. So avoid doing that. Avoid the transmission of any EAS on any airwaves. That's definitely probably for sure a legal gray area, and I would like just me personally, I wouldn't recommend it because I'm pretty sure it's illegal. And the use of the FM transmitter is legal, but it is highly recommended you find a frequency that is not being used and does not have an active station on it within, I would say, 70, 80 miles around your area. And before using, I would recommend doing a little bit of a scan through your radio dial to make sure that it is not an active troposphere day, or a day when a lot of stations are starting to skip in from different areas, because those transmitters can send that FM signal quite a ways, so I wouldn't recommend doing that, because as far as I'm aware, the transmitter that people are using can send that signal quite a ways off on the FM band, so that's definitely not recommended. The transmission on any of those frequencies is illegal. Now, on weather radio frequencies, that's straight up illegal. Now, how using how other station how the bleed through of other equipment counts on that, I don't know. That's that's something that we'd have to make an inquiry to the FCC about. But don't transmit EAS stuff. I wouldn't recommend it. So yeah, that's my little announcement there. So So, so I think that was. I hope everything went well there. Everyone understood. If anyone has any comments or questions, if anyone has any questions, of course, you can post them right now in the chat before we end this broadcast. And again, to recap, the transmission of any EAS frequencies over any airwaves is illegal unless you are a licensed official able to do so. The use of an FM transmitter to transmit um, over the airwaves is legal. However, certain things, of course, like the EAS, cannot be transmitted over it because it's not allowed to be transmitted over anything. Um, it's highly recommended that you gauge how far that FM transmitter is able to transmit and determine whether it is a trip per day by DXing a little bit on your radio before you use the transmitter. Find an empty frequency with a station that is, with hopefully no stations within about 80 miles around, mainly for the reason that hopefully no one around is listening to that frequency. Try to only transmit, of course, things that are legal to transmit. The EAS is not one of those. The bleed through of that frequency onto the weather radio frequency is something I'm not sure about the legality of how that bleeds through, but I can tell you that EAS um, isn't allowed to be transmitted, and the weather radio frequencies are not supposed to be used. So that bleed through, I couldn't tell you how legal that is. I'm pretty sure it's probably not. Using a Baofeng by any means, if you're using that to transmit anything, you might as well just prepare for some FCC fines unless you have the correct licenses. Don't use a Baofeng to ever transmit over any frequencies for weather, emergency response such as police, fire, EMS, ECT. Don't use a Baofeng to transmit unless you have the correct licenses for ham radio, of course, and find out the designated licenses for the frequencies used to transmit using that Baofeng. Um, so yeah, that is a little bit of my PSA on the transmission of weather radio using FM receivers. So we're gonna end this off here. Hope everyone's doing well, and more content is soon to come.